Let's start by setting our motivation. So we recollect that during these weeks, the Lamrim class is being devoted to meditations on impermanence and death on Thursdays and bodhicitta on Mondays, and this is to fulfill Kondrola's advice for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's students to put specific effort into those practices, which is fully in line, of course, with everything that Lama Zopa Rinpoche said over the course of his whole life, emphasizing again and again the importance of trying to get Lamrim realizations. So we try to recognize that by fulfilling the Guru's wishes, we engage in the action that most pleases the holy mind of all of the Buddhas, because the advice of the Guru is the way to benefit sentient beings. It's the unmistaken, infallible method for being of greatest benefit. And by fulfilling the Guru's wishes, we uphold our obligations as students, which strengthens the Guru-disciple relationship and helps to create the causes and the conditions for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's swift return. We reflect in these ways as we generate our motivation. And then with that motivation, the first of the two meditations for today, I thought we would do focusing on death in two different ways. One, looking at the process of the dissolutions. So in a way, preparing for our own death in that way by familiarizing our mind with what naturally arises at the time of death, and particularly not only so that we can avoid fear or confusion, but also so that we, over time, can begin perhaps to make it more and more likely that we can recognize the arising of the mind of clear light, in the hopes that we can hold the mind in the clear light and meditate on our understanding of emptiness at that time, which is an incredibly powerful way of creating deep imprints, meditation on emptiness, speeding our journey to enlightenment very, very swiftly. So that's where we'll begin. So try to settle into a stable, comfortable, upright position. Thinking about keeping your feet flat and your back straight, torso open, hands in the lap right over left with the palms upturned and the thumbs gently touching. Our eyes are gently closed or slightly open, making sure that we let in enough light to remain alert. We try to avoid slouching or leaning, but we also relax into the upright posture, letting go of any unnecessary tension or rigidity in the body. And begin moving your awareness away from the external environment, allowing sights and sounds to be as they are without investigation, trying to constrain your awareness just to the body and mind, concentrating that awareness in the present by attending closely to the physical sensation of the air moving into and back out of the tip of the nostrils. Noticing quickly when anything other than that one physical sensation is arising in the mind, and without judgment or frustration, lifting your awareness up from that distraction and placing it gently but firmly again and again on the breath. Then begin to imagine that you've reached the end of your life and that you're laying on your deathbed, experiencing a natural death, a death from ordinary causes, old age or sickness. As we go through the 8 stages, the 8 dissolutions, where the mind becomes increasingly more and more subtle. So at the beginning of these 8 stages, thinking and perceiving is still active, and it begins to diminish over the course of the first 4 stages. So the first stage, the earth element of the body absorbs. The earth element is the quality of our body associated with its solidity. As it begins to absorb, imagine, visualize your body losing strength. It becomes weaker. And you feel drained of energy. The perception of sinking might arise. It becomes progressively more difficult to sit upright, to hold on to anything. The color of the body begins to fade, and the cheeks become sunken. Your eyesight becomes unclear, and it becomes difficult to open and close the eyes. So imagine this unfolding. Could be over the course of a few days, a week or two. As the earth element gradually absorbs. Try to clearly and vividly imagine how this process will unfold in the future. And then think that the inner sign of this process is a vision of a shimmering silver blue mirage. And then the next element to absorb is the water element. The water element is all of the fluids of the body, as well as the quality of the body of cohesion. You can think of when two droplets of water are next to each other and they adhere, that quality of the body to adhere or be cohesive. As this element absorbs, you begin to feel dryness in the eyes, mouth, and throat. The tongue becomes thick and heavy. Feelings of pleasure and displeasure in your body diminish. And your sense of hearing weakens. There could be a haze to the mind. And that might give rise to frustration. The inner sign of this absorption is a smoke-like appearance, like wisps of smoke in a hazy sky. The next absorption is the fire element. The fire element is all of the heat in the body. At this stage in the process, your mouth and nose dry up completely. The warmth of the body begins to disappear. Often from the hands and feet, first moving closer and closer to the heart. At this stage, you can no longer eat or drink or digest. The mind alternates between moments of clarity and moments of confusion. It becomes impossible to recall the names of anyone around you, even close friends and family. You may not even recognize faces. Your sense of smell weakens and breathing becomes increasingly difficult. The in-breath is quite weak, and the out-breath is stronger and longer. The inner sign of this stage is a vision of shimmering red sparks like fireflies, or when a burning log is hit. The fourth stage is the absorption of the air element. At this stage in the death process. It's no longer possible to move your limbs. You become fixed in place. Confusion tends to predominate the mind, and you lose awareness of the outside world, as though everything outside of oneself is just a blur. The last remaining capacity to contact the environment is slipping away. Your sense of taste and touch dissolve entirely. Breathing becomes more and more difficult. And then the breath stops altogether. The last of your conceptual thoughts cease. And the inner vision, the inner sign is of a dim red-blue light, like the last flickering of a candle flame about to go out. At the end of these 4 stages, gross consciousness has now completely ceased. The mind becomes increasingly subtle. The 5th stage is the white vision. which is described as like a very clear, empty sky, like the sky in autumn, full of the brightness of a full moon. And the red vision appears. This was like a clear, empty sky filled with rays of a copper red sunset. And then comes black near attainment. This is a vision of total and complete darkness. And it ends with a momentary swooning, a loss of conscious awareness. It's momentary. And then is the arising of the mind of the clear light of death. The mind is now at its most subtle. The appearance is like that of the autumn sky at dawn, completely pure and empty, and filled with clear, colorless light. So try to hold your mind to that appearance. Try to not let distraction arise or bring it back again and again to the clear light. And then when you're ready, we'll come back together. All right. Any thoughts or questions?
Venerable, is it your understanding that when we're experiencing the clear light, that if our mind wanders at all at that moment, that we are then pulled out of the clear light? It feels as though we have this kind of luxury to meditate on it now, whereas it's my understanding that that's not the case at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the actual mind of clear light can only arise at the time of death or when a meditator has learned to cause all of the energies, the winds of the body to absorb and abide in the central channel under, intentional control. So this is just sort of a written description of, kind of what people say that it's like. Um, the idea just being that it's one way of kind of, if we, if a person does this a lot, then hopefully as they're dying, hopefully for one, they die well, they die, kind of more slowly and so on, and not violently, and where, any for most people, any hope of using that constructively is much more difficult. But so the goal, hopefully, is that we just begin to recognize, but really all of these inner signs, we looked at the outer signs and the inner signs. All of these inner signs really do require a higher degree of focus, and definitely between that moment of the swooning, between the black near attainment and then the arising of the mind of clear light, the mind can generally will very, very quickly just enter into the intermediate state. To actually pause that process, to hold the mind there, requires having developed a high degree of meditative skill and control. We can't avoid going through these 8 stages, but actually consciously being aware of them is different. That is something that we have to cultivate. Marion, you have a question.
Hey, good evening. Sorry, I had to hop on late, so I don't know if you may have already touched upon this. I'm trying to incorporate a meditation, longer sitting meditation practice in my morning habits. I usually only have time for like 10 minutes in the morning, so I'm trying to prolong it to, goal is like 30 minutes, but I'm wondering how we can perhaps just implement impermanence in our day-to-day lives, or try to change our thought process when it comes to impermanence and romantic relationships.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, really, the fundamental premise of what we just did is an analytical meditation. There's other ways. So this was a meditation on the dissolutions of the death process, impermanence. So the concept, if you look at the Lamrim, you'll see impermanence and death as kind of the two concepts that are put together, and they're different. Death is a consequence of the impermanent nature of the body, meaning that the body is changing moment by moment by moment, and given enough time, that will inevitably lead to a time when the body can no longer host consciousness. The body no longer works well enough to host consciousness, and then consciousness leaves the body, and we call that death. So impermanence, the concept of impermanence, is just the idea that everything that is what's called compounded, everything that you can see and taste and touch and so on, any object of the senses, is changing moment by moment by moment. And so, of course, with relationships, it's also true that because people are impermanent, that either, when two things come together, they will separate, and that can happen. Best case scenario is that happens at death. If two people come together, they will separate at death, and in many cases that separation will happen prior to death. But that's, best case scenario is that, you and this person remain associated, and then really best case is that you die before they do, because otherwise, you have to deal with the loss of them dying before you do. But one person ultimately is going to die before the other if there's no other reason why that separation happens. So in terms of, specifically romantic relationships, like you mentioned, they're really not different than any other kind of relationship, in the sense that what Buddhism emphasizes is that we, of course, recognize, that I'm impermanent, they're impermanent, and this, so whether it's a friendship or whether it's a marriage or what have you, it cannot be otherwise, but there will be a separation, and so the best way of relating to that other person, whether they're just a friend or what have you, is to relate to them through the lens of love and compassion, the lens of wanting them to be happy and wanting them to be free of suffering. So those perspectives ask the question, what is it that I can do to be of benefit to this other person? Whereas the more common way that we relate to others in our relationships is, what is this person doing to be of benefit to me? Are they continuing to please me? Are they continuing to act in a way that accords with my preferences, my interests, my desires? And so that's a more self-centered, egoistic view that's, of course, very common in everyone's. Doesn't make a person a bad person. It's sort of the default view that we all have. But what Buddhism is encouraging is that we recognize, again, recognizing their impermanence, recognizing that their mind is changing, their body is changing, my mind is changing, my body is changing. And so the most realistic, most balanced way of trying to relate to them is, as much as possible, through the lens of love and compassion, rather than the lens of, are they saying the things that I like them to say? Are they doing the things that I prefer that they do? Of course, if a person is abusive or so on, then of course we need to create distance. We need to, have healthy boundaries. But it isn't the case that any relationship is going to, where that other person all day, every day is going to be always saying the most pleasant, they're going to have bad days. They're going to be stressed out. And so the more that we can only be trying to relate to them through that lens of love and compassion, the healthier, more realistic, and more balanced that relationship will be. Of course, keeping in mind, the necessity for realistic boundaries as well. Not allowing them to engage in truly harmful behaviors. And so how a person does that is really the method that any other way of changing our behavior from the Buddhist perspective, which is that we have a formal, like you're saying, you have a formal practice where you spend time actively cultivating these insights. And then the more we cultivate them, the more they bleed over into daily life. The deeper those insights go in the mind through repetition. So, you're saying you only have 10 minutes in the morning, which is fine, so then maybe you try to find 10 minutes at some other point during the day as well. And maybe on the weekends, you have a little bit more time. And maybe so you can find 2 or 3 10 or 15-minute periods throughout the day on Saturday and Sunday. And the more we repeat these insights to ourselves, also by reading and by studying, not only just formal meditation, but also learning through listening to teachings, going to teachings, reading books and texts and things, we're creating the imprints of this wisdom. And really, it just spontaneously, naturally, over time, with repetition, with consistency, becomes more and more deeply integrated into how we naturally react to others. But the idea of impermanence, the Buddha is not trying to get us to believe something that he made up, or that he's just pointing out what's true. He's pointing out what actually characterizes our experience. And the problem is that we fight against that. And the fighting against that is what gives rise to suffering. So he's just encouraging us to get in touch with what's true. And when we do that, and when we live from an understanding of what's true, then we suffer less. But Buddhism doesn't have any quick fixes. It's a slow process. Genuinely changing how we relate, genuinely changing what the content of our mind is a lifelong process. But through the consistency, I would say the consistency is really the most important part, not getting to a point where we don't skip any days, and then getting to a point where we might be adding an additional session, slowly building these habits and really having that consistency. So in terms of progressing from 10 to 30 minutes, generally the idea, is that because an important part, there's nothing wrong with 10 minutes, absolutely. If you want to try to build on that, the idea is you want to do that in a gradual way, where you are noticing that 10 minutes has started to go really well in terms of being concentrated on the object, where you've begun to notice that you're dealing pretty well with distraction. I would say 60 to 70% of that time, you can say to yourself that the object is really appearing to the mind rather than distraction. And that's getting to a point where that's true about a 10-minute period is, again, not a quick process. So there's no reason to rush to think that 10 minutes isn't effective and you have to get to 30, because if you try to do 30 but the mind is mostly distracted, then the habits that you're building aren't as constructive as starting with 10 like you are, and just waiting until you've gotten that 10 minutes to be where the object is really, really there most of the time.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That was really, really helpful. Very valuable information. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, we are just about out of time, so we'll end with the the swift return prayers. which I will screen share here in a moment. Why is it doing that? Oh, okay. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And Kondralas. Guru, think of me. Guru, consider me. Gracious Guru, care for me. Guru, most gracious and kind, do not deprive us of your compassionate refuge. Listen and consider this heartfelt prayer made by a tormented disciple. Guru, you embody the blessings of the Buddhas of the three times. You may rest in great bliss, equipoise within the dhatu of unimpeded luminosity, yet the playful dance of your loving compassion can emanate in myriad ways. The swift appearance of your magical wisdom, the Rupakaya. The time has come for you to care for us once again with your affectionate compassion. I invoke you, I call upon you, I implore you on behalf of all beings. Arise, arise, arise from the Dharmakaya. Do not rest in Kachara or other pure celestial realms. Rather, to benefit the Buddhist teachings and all living beings, swiftly return to this southern continent to spread the Buddha Dharma of study and realization. Quickly return to guide us poor, wretched beings. Such is the desperate cry of us, your disciples. Return so that we may actually behold your presence and receive the blessings of your enlightened body, speech, and mind. All violations, errors, mistakes, and broken samaya that we have made in relation to your spontaneously present awakened body, speech, mind, and activity, through our being baffled, confused, and conceiving things in erroneous ways, we confess within the luminous emptiness of your three kayas. Of everything auspicious, the supreme auspiciousness, may there be the auspiciousness of emptiness and compassion conjoined, and the auspiciousness of a timely meeting between master and disciples. Through the force of the truth of unchanging suchness, may the unmistaken incarnation return quickly. This lament was made by me, a dakini with pure faith and samaya, her eyes filled with tears of sorrow. May these wishes of a beggar woman be fulfilled through the blessings of the deities of the three roots. Perception, its object in the act of perceiving, all dissolved within the expanse, the blissful clarity of suchness. Ah. So pause in that spirit of dedication and think, recollecting our altruistic intention to help create the causes and the conditions for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's swift return. I try to visualize that ripening result flowing forth from the virtuous karma of our actions. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Elaine is doing a weekend retreat this weekend and next weekend. So that's happening. I hope people can join. And we'll meet again on Monday.